Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on the state of 2020 DDoS threat landscape. My name is Vivek, and I'm here with the product marketing team at Cloudflare, focusing on our security products. In today's webinar, we'll discuss trends with respect to DDoS attacks that we have observed over Cloudflare's network. And I'll also talk about the resurgence of ransom-based DDoS attacks. And finally, how Cloudflare can help organizations with their security needs. Before diving in, I do want to begin with grounding in Cloudflare's mission, because it really guides everything we do. Our mission is bold but simple. It's to help build a better internet, one that's faster, more secure, and more reliable for everyone. And we're achieving on that mission by building a global cloud network. We operate a global cloud platform that delivers a broad range of networks, services, and application services to both individuals and businesses of all sizes around the world. We serve close to 21 million HTTP requests per second on average, and approximately 25 million internet properties are on Cloudflare. In Q4 of 2020 alone, we blocked an average of 57 billion with a B cyber threats each day. So that's the scale at which Cloudflare operates. It's massive, and it's because of our distributed global edge network that gives us a unique vantage point on the internet traffic trends globally, as well as the shifting DDoS attack trends that we're able to see. Now, let's look at some of the DDoS trends that we've seen over our network over the last quarter. I'll specifically talk about four things: the frequency of attacks, the size, the attack vectors used, and the geographical distribution of DDoS attacks observed over Cloudflare's network. So let's dive right in. First, let's look at the number of attacks observed. The fourth and the last quarter of 2020 was actually a very different quarter from the rest of the year. Most of the world went into shelter in place around March of last year. We all resorted to working from home, playing from home, and in general, staying connected online more than ever before. This not only translated to a huge increase in the overall internet traffic, but also the number of cyber threats that we observed. Earlier last year, when we released our blogs for Q2 and Q3, we noted that the number of cyber threats that we observed over our quarter significantly surged. In fact, the number of DDoS attacks on the network layer that we observed in Q2 compared to Q1 had doubled, and the number that we saw in Q3 had again doubled compared to Q2. So that was a 4x to the pre-pandemic levels. However, for the first time in 2020, in Q4, the number of attacks decreased. While 48% of all the attacks we saw in 2020 occurred in Q3 alone, the last quarter had a mere 15%. And before you jump to any conclusions of the internet getting much safer, and now that we're seeing lower number of attacks, let's actually dig into a few more numbers. Let's first look at the attack size. Before I talk about the numbers themselves, let me explain a little bit about what we're seeing on the chart here. There's a couple of different ways of measuring an L3 or L4, a network layer DDoS attack size. One is the volume of traffic it delivers, or its bit rate, and it's often measured in gigabits per second. And the other is the number of packets it delivers, or its packet rate, which is measured in packets per second. Attacks with high bit rates typically attempt to saturate the last mile network links of the target. And attacks with high packet rates attempt to overwhelm routers or other inline hardware devices. As we observed in the previous quarters, in Q4, the majority of the attacks were quite small. And by small, I mean under 1 gigabits per second or 1 million packets per second specifically. The prevalence of smaller attacks may seem unusual, but it actually indicates that DDoS attackers are it might indicate that DDoS attackers are not using their full capabilities. But really, this trend is not surprising at all, since most attacks are launched by amateur attackers using tools that are easy to use and cost a few dollars at most. Other small attacks may also serve as a smokescreen to distract security teams from other kinds of cyber attacks which might be happening simultaneously. They also use them to test existing network defense mechanisms sometimes. And even though most of these attacks that you see here are under 50,000 packets per second or 500 megabits per second, keep in mind that these attacks are still very capable of bringing down entire networks. For example, a 1 gigabits per second Ethernet interface can deliver anywhere between 80,000 to 1.5 million packets per second. And assuming the organization also, of course, has legitimate traffic being delivered to them over that same interface, most companies, you can see how even these small packet rate DDoS attacks can easily take down entire internet properties and network infrastructure. Now, when we dive a bit deeper, we observe another interesting trend, and that is that there is an increase in the number of large DDoS attacks. When we look at the quarter-over-quarter details, while small DDoS attacks still constitute a majority of most of the attacks observed, we're noticing an increasing number of larger attacks, specifically the number of attacks over 500 megabits per second and 50,000 packets per second saw a massive uptick. You'll see that on this slide, that the attacks over 10 million packets per second increased threefold, and those over 100 gigabits per second were 10x of what we saw in the previous quarter. And this is a very disturbing trend. This implies that attackers are getting bolder and more sophisticated in their attacks. Organizations need defense mechanisms that are able to handle these large attacks. One problem with on-prem network infrastructure, on-prem hardware appliances for DDoS, is that they're very easily overwhelmed by these large volumetric attacks. And having a cloud-based solution that helps absorb this attack much easily is something that's become a fundamental need for most organizations' networks today. This is a very interesting example. It's an example of a unique large attack that Cloudflare observed. It was an ag flood attack that was automatically detected and mitigated by Cloudflare defense systems. But it was an attack on one of our customers, one of our enterprise customers. When what was unique about this attack was not so much the max packet rate itself, which by absolute numbers was quite high, but it was also the attack method that appears to have been borrowed from the world of acoustics. As you can see in this graph, the attack's packet rate followed a wave-shaped pattern for over 19 hours. So imagine being an SRE or being a member of your security team that's completely being bombarded by this kind of attack for over 19 hours. It seems as though the attackers were inspired by an acoustic concept called beat. For this reason, we codenamed this attack as beat, and in acoustics, a beat is really a term that's used to describe an interference of two different wave frequencies, and the sine wave ends up looking like this. The point of this slide is that attackers are not just getting bolder, they're also getting more creative in their ways, and having a solution that shifts and provides a strong defense, even as the attack patterns and methods are shifting, is really key. Now, let's look at the duration of attacks. About 73% of all attacks in Q4 of 2020 lasted under an hour. On the other end of the spectrum, nearly 9% of attacks lasted over 24 hours. And if you look at the numbers from Q3, it was close to 1.5% in Q3 of 2020. So this is another disturbing trend, that the more persistent attacks are also increasing in size and number. This increase reinforces the need for a real-time, always-on defense system to protect against attacks of every size and duration. Now, short, bursty attacks may attempt to cause damage without being detected by DDoS mitigation solutions, because oftentimes they're all over before the analyst even identifies the attack traffic and patterns. And that's why having something that's automated is really key. Alternatively, the use of short attacks might also be used to probe the existing cyber defenses of the target. Load testing tools and DDoS tools that are widely available on the dark web can generate multiple short bursts in a single day, say SYN floods, and then follow them up with a short attack using an alternate attack vector. This allows attackers to understand the security posture of their targets before they decide to potentially launch larger attacks at larger rates for longer durations, which of course come at a much bigger cost. We've also seen in other cases where attackers generate small DDoS attacks as proof and warning to the target organizations of the attacker's capability to cause real damage later on. And it's often preceded by a ransom note to the target organization. And I'll talk about this in just a second. But whatever the motivation of DDoS attacks of any size or duration, they're not going away anytime soon. Even short DDoS attacks can cause harm, and having an automated real-time robust security in place is critical for any online business. So what DDoS vectors are most commonly deployed? Before we get into that, it's important to know what an attack vector is. Essentially, an attack vector is a term used to describe the attack method. The most popular method are SYN floods, which constituted nearly 42% of all attacks observed in Q4, followed by ACK flood attacks and reset attacks and other UDP-based attacks. So what's a SYN flood attack? We've seen this in the last quarter as well. It dominated the charts. A SYN flood is a flood of TCP packets with the synchronized flag turned on. It aims to exploit the very fundamental handshake process of a TCP connection. By repeatedly sending the initial connection request packets with a synchronized flag, the attacker attempts to overwhelm the router's connection table that tracks the state of the TCP connections, essentially. The router then replies with a packet that contains a synchronized acknowledgement flag, which is called a SYN ACK, and allocates a certain amount of memory for each given connection, and falsely waits for the client to respond with a final ACK. Given sufficient number of SYNs that occupy a router's memory, the router is unable to then further allocate memory for legitimate clients, causing a denial of service. SYN floods continue to be the most popular attack vector, used solely because they're easier to generate with a botnet and cripple any kind of network infrastructure because SYN is so fundamental to network communication. While TCP-based attacks like SYN floods and reset floods remain popular, UDP protocol-specific attacks such as NetBIOS and ISACM-based DDoS attacks are seeing an explosion compared to the prior quarter. NetBIOS is a protocol that allows applications on separate machines to communicate and access shared resources over a local area network. And ISACM is a protocol used to establish security associations and cryptographic keys while setting up an IPsec VPN connection, ironically. IPsec uses IKE, which is Internet Key Exchange Protocol, to ensure that secure connections the connections are secure and to authenticate and encrypt packets of data sent over IP. Cloudflare continues to see protocol-based attacks and indeed multi-vector attacks deployed, which are being used to attempt to bring down all of this network infrastructure. As the complexity of the attacks elevates, the DDoS protection also needs to match up or be better. It needs better DDoS and more sophisticated DDoS protection needs to be put in place so that organizations have business continuity and they can be secure and online at all times. To understand where these attacks are coming from, we look at Cloudflare's edge network data centers, where the traffic was ingested, and this is as opposed to rather than the location of the source IP itself. And we don't look at the source IP because when attackers launch these network layer attacks, it's very easy to spoof a source IP address in order to obfuscate the attack source. In this report, we also measure the attack traffic as observed from a Cloudflare data center relative to the non-attack traffic observed at the same data center for getting this geo-based distribution. This gives us more accuracy in our endeavor to pinpoint geographic locations that are observing more threats than others. We're able to, of course, achieve geographical accuracy in our report because we have data centers in over 200 cities in more than 100 countries around the world. And when we looked at the Q4 numbers, we observed that there's some interesting insights in our data centers across the world. And our data centers in Mauritius, Romania, and Brunei recorded the highest percentages of attack traffic relative to non-attack traffic, specifically between 4.5 to close to 5% of all traffic in these countries came from DDoS attacks. Another way of saying this is that almost 5 of every 100 bytes was part of attack traffic. And this observation just indicates that there's an increased botnet activity happening in those countries. There's more DDoS attacks specific to those data centers than in most other countries. If you'd like more detailed distribution of geographical distribution of data based on a continent or on every continent, feel free to go to our blog and get more detailed information over there. Now, what might explain this comparatively high incidence of DDoS attacks in these countries? It's really impossible to say for sure, but here are some possibilities for the top 2 countries on the list. In August of 2020, a state of environmental emergency was declared in Mauritius after a ship carrying nearly 4,000 tons of fuel dragged its hull. The oil spill ignited anti-government protests, calling for the resignation of the prime minister. And since then, the government has suspended the parliament twice and has also been accused of suppressing local media and independent reporting covering the incident. Even 5 months after, following a series of human rights scandals, the protests continue. The events in Mauritius may be linked to this increased DDoS activity that we've observed over there. 2 events may be behind the increased DDoS activity in Romania. Romania recently held parliamentary elections, which ended on December 6th of 2020. In addition, the EU announced on December 9th that Romania will host their new cybersecurity research hub, the European Cybersecurity Industrial Technology and Research Competence Center, the ECCC. And another possible explanation is that Romania is the country with the cheapest super fast broadband internet in the world, making it easier for anyone to launch volumetric attacks from within Romania. We have a further breakdown, as I mentioned, of geo-distribution by every continent. So if you're curious where your country stands in your continent, please refer to our blog on our website, blog.cloudflare.com, for more detailed reporting on that. Now, let's talk about another disturbing trend that we've seen propagating, and that is a rise in extortion and ransom-based DDoS attacks targeting organizations around the world. Organizations, large and small, came to Cloudflare in the past few months, asking for help in keeping their network infrastructure online while they figured out how to respond to ransom notes. In a ransom DDoS attack, a malicious party threatens a person or an organization with a cyber attack that could knock their network, websites, or applications offline for a period of time unless the person or organization pays a ransom. While the extortion threats don't always result in an actual attack, the cases seen in recent months show that attacker groups are willing to carry out the threat, launching large-scale DDoS attacks that are overwhelming organizations that lack adequate protection. In some cases, our customers have told us that initial teaser attacks were launched, and sometimes these initial teaser attacks may be sufficient to cause impact if they're not protected by a cloud-based DDoS protection service. Entities claiming to be Fancy Bear, Cozy Bear, and the Lazarus Group have been threatening to launch these attacks against organizations' network infrastructure unless a ransom is paid before a given deadline. Additionally, this initial DDoS attack is usually launched as a form of demonstration before sending the ransom email. And it's typically a UDP reflection attack that we've seen, but we've also seen a variety of protocols that they attack with. And these typically last about 30 minutes to about 2 hours in duration and reach sometimes even as large as tens of gigabits per second. In fact, we recently onboarded a large Fortune 500 company that was under a ransom threat and an attack. After we onboarded them, we automatically mitigated 1,800 plus DDoS attacks on their network that lasted an aggregate of over 120 hours. The attack in this particular case comprised mainly UDP floods, GRE floods, and TCP-based attacks. But even as the attack patterns changed in real time, Cloudflare was able to mitigate them immediately. So, what do you do if you receive a ransom note? What should you do? If you receive a threat, the first recommendation is that don't panic. And don't pay the ransom. Paying the ransom only encourages bad actors and finances illegal activities. And there's no guarantee that attackers won't attack your network anyway. And the second is notify law enforcement. The FBI does get involved in this, and we recommend that you reach out to your local law enforcement and follow up the required procedures from there. And the third, contact Cloudflare. We're here to help. We're on standby to ensure that your websites, your applications, your network infrastructure, whatever it is that's connected to the internet, are safeguarded from these kind of attacks. The other things that you can do to be prepared first thing, know that this is a very real threat that's impacting many organizations today, and there's very few simple steps that you can take to be prepared. First is utilize an automated, always-on DDoS protection service. Don't rely on a reactive SOC-based DDoS protection service, which requires humans to analyze attack traffic. It just takes too long. Instead, onboard to a cloud-based service that has sufficient network capacity and automated DDoS mitigation systems. Second, work with your vendor to build and understand so that they build and understand your threat model, and work together with them for your DDoS protection to tailor mitigation strategies for your specific workloads. Every network is different, and each poses unique challenges when integrating with DDoS mitigation systems. Third is create a contingency plan and educate your employees. Just be prepared or have plans ready and train your teams on them. In many cases, the attackers will send emails to publicly available email addresses of your employees, some of whom may not be technical and might not know what to do. And while they're figuring out what to do when they receive such a threat, time is of the essence, and organizations need to respond very quickly. So educate all of your employees, even the non-technical folks, on what to do if they receive a ransom email. They should report it immediately to your security incident response team. The attacks that we just talked about and the trends and insights that we've just seen are all derived from our automated DDoS protection systems and those that are seen over our network. So now let's see how Cloudflare can help and what really is under the hood for those systems. Cloudflare provides comprehensive DDoS protection for anything connected to the internet, whether it's your websites, individual application servers, or entire network infrastructure with /24 IP subnets. If it's exposed to the internet, it is vulnerable to attacks, and Cloudflare protects it. As opposed to legacy scrubbing center providers that operate a limited number of data centers, Cloudflare's DDoS protection is delivered from every one of our data centers. So the first map that you saw with all of our data centers spread across the globe, every one of those, every single server provides DDoS mitigation. And the specific product that provides DDoS mitigation for network infrastructure is called Magic Transit. And it ensures that your entire networks are not just safe from DDoS attacks of any size or kind, but it also ensures that your traffic is actually not slower, but actually faster over Cloudflare's network. So how does it really work? It's essentially our L3 or network security and routing service here at Cloudflare. We use BGP, Border Gateway Protocol, to announce your routes to the customer's network from every single data center around the globe, so that the traffic is ingested closest to the source at a Cloudflare data center. Once ingested by the Cloudflare data center closest to the source, this traffic has been inspected for any threats, and of course, any layer 7 traffic that will also benefit from content caching or web application firewall inspection is routed to our L7 pipeline without incurring any additional network hops. So think about this: if you have two different providers for L7 and L3 services, then there is this additional network hop and latency that you'd have to worry about, but not with Cloudflare, because all of your traffic is actually being processed at the same data center. And once it's processed, all that clean traffic is then sent over to the customer's data center over a direct connect or encapsulated using GRE and tunneled over from the Cloudflare data center to your network. Anycast GRE tunnels are what we use, and it's basically where one of the tunnel endpoints is our Anycast IP address, and the other tunnel endpoint would be the customer's CPE public-facing IP address. And this ensures that they're highly available and resilient to network failures that would bring traditional GRE tunnels down. And of course, finally, the egress traffic from the customer's network is sent directly over to the requester or the client using direct server return. So that's the level of protection that we aim to deliver in order to build a better internet. Why Cloudflare is better is we have a large network that has not just a network capacity, but a DDoS mitigation capacity of over 59 terabits per second. That's higher than the next 4 competitors combined. Our time to mitigation is under 3 seconds. We don't operate scrubbing centers. We think that model is fundamentally broken because Cloudflare has always been a company that values not just security, but also performance of your traffic. We're also like the immune system for the internet in a lot of ways, where we're able to apply the learning that we have from the intelligence that we gather from approximately 25 million internet properties and then apply that to across our entire network. So think of it that if we see a new kind of attack deployed in Chile, we will protect those network properties, but we'll also deploy those learnings around the world so that if a similar attack happens in India, then it is automatically and immediately mitigated. Our solutions are also very easy to use. We are very fast with onboarding and deployment, and most of our products are very easy to use and self-serviceable as well. Cloudflare also pioneered unmetered and unlimited DDoS mitigation in 2017, where we don't charge you for any attack traffic, unlike other vendors, where you have to request a credit from them. It is a fixed plan, it is unmetered, and you know what you're getting into before you sign a contract with Cloudflare. How do we compare to other vendors? This is a table showing just that. Cloudflare offers DDoS protection, as I mentioned, from every single one of our data centers across 200 cities around the globe. And because of the way our network is architected, our DDoS mitigation capacity for network infrastructure is higher than the next 4 competitors combined. We also detect and mitigate network layer attacks in under 3 seconds globally on average, and this is one of the fastest in the industry. Of course, for any pre-configured static rules that take into effect immediately, the time to mitigate is 0 seconds. Cloudflare is also widely recognized by industry analysts to be a leader in DDoS mitigation. We're recognized by IDC, Gartner, as well as Forrester for our ability to detect and mitigate DDoS attacks of any size or kind. This is an interesting story. All of us know Wikipedia. It's one of the most visited websites in the world with over 25 billion monthly page views. The Wikimedia Foundation hosts 13 collaborative knowledge projects from Wikipedia. It's the free encyclopedia to Wikibooks, Wiktionary, Wikidata, et cetera, et cetera. In September 2019, they reached out to Cloudflare because their data centers were under attack. Within a few hours, our support responded, and they could help. And they basically helped them because they were struggling to recover from this persistent attack being targeted at Wikipedia, which had knocked their services offline. Cloudflare worked very closely with the Wikimedia team to help get Magic Transit in place, and once it was, we were able to show the results that not only did we mitigate all the attacks immediately, but we also were able to restore global service to Wikipedia, and the imposed latency was very minimal. It was 66 milliseconds with Cloudflare versus 63 milliseconds before Cloudflare was inserted into the network. And since they've onboarded, they've deployed Magic Transit as a core part of their network infrastructure. Finally, I'd like to end this webinar with a shameless plug. We're running a limited time promotion. If you are using a legacy provider for DDoS mitigation today, then you can try Cloudflare for free until your current contract with the legacy provider expires. We provide a superior product, we provide better service, and we are confident that you love Cloudflare. Go to cloudflare.com/LP/better for more information, or another way to find more information is just simply reach out to me at vivek@cloudflare.com. I will now open the floor to any questions. So, Nick, what questions do we have today?
Thanks, Vivek. Let's see. We have a couple here in the Q&A bank. So let's start off here. Would you expect the current duration of DDoS attacks to change as we move to more complex services?
That's very interesting. I'm not sure what you mean by complex services, but we've continued to see smaller attacks dominate in the last quarter, but we're also seeing the share of longer attacks grow. But the industry trend in general is that attacks are getting shorter and smaller. But that doesn't mean they do no harm. The rise in smaller attacks can directly be attributed to what I like to call the new age cyber vandals. People like including amateurs and teenagers sitting at home with nothing to do are bored. Launching DDoS attacks is cheap, and you don't need much technical background. DDoS as a service tools have provided a possible avenue for these bad actors with little to no technical expertise to launch DDoS attacks quickly, easily, in a cost-effective manner, and with limited bandwidth. I was reading a report by, I think it was by Kaspersky, where it said something like launching DDoS attacks can be as cheap as $5 for 5 minutes. But of course, we know that even a single minute of downtime for many organizations can be very significantly harmful. So yeah.
Awesome. Thanks. We have another one relating back to the different vectors. Why do you think the SYN floods have remained so popular?
Good question. So again, a SYN flood, which is also called a half-open attack, is a type of a DDoS attack which aims to make a server unavailable to legitimate traffic by consuming all of its available resources. But this kind of flood repeatedly sends these initial connection requests, the SYN packets, and they overwhelm all the available ports on this targeted server. I think it's very common today because of botnets and the ease with which we can command IoT devices to initiate connections to a server. If an attack is created using a botnet, the likelihood of tracking the attack back to its source is very low. It's been around for years, and I doubt it's going away anytime soon.
Awesome. Thank you for that clarification. We have a couple more. Do you have a recommendation on on-demand versus always-on modes for DDoS protection deployment?
So here's the thing. With most vendors, you have to worry about network latency. And I alluded to this a little bit when I talked about Wikimedia and about our data centers and how we're globally distributed. But imagine a case when you're under attack. Many vendors require you to call them when they're under attack to turn on their services. Then they take sometimes minutes, maybe or close to an hour sometimes to turn on their service. As we saw in the slides earlier, most attacks will have done enough harm by then. Then they reroute all of your network traffic to a distant scrubbing center, which increases the latency of your applications further. With Cloudflare, there's none of this. We offer both modes, always on and on demand, but we do recommend always on to all of our customers for 3 reasons. The first is that there's no latency penalty with Cloudflare. In fact, traffic is faster over our network than over the public internet. The second reason is that you still have full control over your network. With detailed network analytics that we provide, you can see when you're attacked, what the threats are, how these threat vectors are changing, and how Cloudflare mitigated them automatically. And the third reason is that mitigation is automatic and just faster due to the nature of always on. Most of our customers see these advantages with us and choose to deploy in the always on mode.
Perfect. Thank you. Looks like we have one of our enterprise customers asking. So it looks like they already have some DDoS issues. So he's a big confused. So he's asking, should we have Magic Transit? So if you could kind of just go over, I guess, how Magic Transit can help again, and maybe if there's a specific use case they should use it. Obviously, we'll follow up with you. The person who asked this, we'll follow up with you if there's any further clarification needed. Make sure your account team follows up with you on Magic Transit too after this.
Yeah, we'll definitely follow up. And just to reiterate, I'm going to push the slide once more to our audience. Cloudflare has 3 different DDoS mitigation products. One is for layer 7, which is for applications. So if you have anything relate, maybe a website, a web API, or any web application that needs protection from DDoS attacks, that is our standard DDoS mitigation product. That's also available on our self-serve plans, but for any advanced features, you will have to sign an enterprise contract with Cloudflare. The second DDoS mitigation product we launched about 3 years back is called Spectrum. If you have a gaming server, if you have a financial trading application, or any sort of application servers that run on TCP or UDP, that is what you want. You want to protect it, and you want to accelerate that traffic over Cloudflare's network, because it's not just protection that you want, but also low latency. Then you want Spectrum. Now, when you have entire data centers, entire network infrastructure, where you own your own IP space and you're advertising your routes currently via BGP to the world, then you will need Magic Transit. It's almost like if you own a network and you are routing on the internet, that's when you need Magic Transit. That's why it's fundamentally Magic Transit is a very different product from a lot of other Cloudflare products, because it's not a reverse proxy product. It's a product that uses BGP and uses BGP diversion to attract and ingest all the traffic destined for the customer's entire network to Cloudflare. So to take into, again, using Wikipedia as an example, when we onboarded Wikimedia, we were ingesting all the traffic that was destined for all of Wikimedia's services at our Cloudflare's data centers. So, and that happened because we were advertising to the world using BGP, saying, we are Wikimedia, send us your traffic, so that we are able to scrub all the threats away and send only clean traffic to Wikipedia back with the minimal latency that we promise. So we're happy to talk to you more about this, and we're happy to do an entire analysis on what your existing network infrastructure looks like, what are your assets that are exposed to the internet. The bottom line of this slide is that regardless of what you have connected to the internet, if you have anything connected to the internet, it is vulnerable to attacks, and it is something that we can help with.
Thank you so much for that clarification. I'm sorry, I can't see the name of the person that asked that, but I do see the account that you're with, so I will make sure that our account team reaches out. We can get some additional information and maybe make some recommendations, help you out. Thank you. That's most of what I see here, Vivek. Are there any other questions here?
I don't see any other questions at this point, and I think we're close to our time to wrap up.
Perfect.
Well, good idea to wrap up.
Yeah, we can go ahead and wrap up here. Thanks everyone for joining. We really appreciate it. If you have any other questions, Vivek's email, I think let's bring it up real quick. I'm sorry, Vivek, I might have changed the slide. So you guys can reach Vivek. And if you have any other questions, you can reach out to him directly or contact your account team. Thank you all, everyone, for joining, and hope to see you at our next webinar. We really appreciate it.